morning, guys. You know, I honestly hate it when Doug and Barb aren't here. I miss all y'all when y'all aren't here. But when Barbara's not here, I can't blame me being late on her, and it just throws my game off, so I miss that. There's a point, I'm going to warn you with a spoiler alert. There is a point in a famous movie that I'm about to describe, but again, you've had 20 years to see it, so it's on you for not watching it by now. But one of Steven Spielberg's biggest movies is a movie called Schindler's List. It's a movie where Oskar Schindler is a great businessman, and after he's living in the Holocaust Germany, or Nazi Germany, and he decides to save some Jews that have been persecuted. And it's a hard task for him. In fact, what the movie doesn't tell you is after that film was over, he ended up destitute. It cost him everything to make that sacrifice. But at the end of the film, he looks at his possessions and what he has left, and he's crying. And he cries, I think, out of joy of what his possessions cost him to save, the people he did save. But I think he weeps because if he'd given up all of his possessions, he might have saved even more. It's a very complicated scene emotionally. And a lot of times when we cry, that's what happens. There's more than one reason we're crying. When my grandmother passed, I cried. I cried because I was happy she wasn't suffering anymore. But I cried because I was sad that I would not see her for some time. Psychologists have studied tears a lot, and they really don't know why we cry, as far as why some people cry so much more than others. Some people can cry at the drop of a hat, and some people just don't. We really don't know why. But today, I just feel like as a church, we've cried a lot this year. One of the things I love about being in a church our size is that when one of us cries, it affects us all. It's a beautiful thing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about tears. What they mean, where God is, why we have them. Should we not cry? I don't know. For me, I would start by telling you that I think tears are a big part of our humanity. Tears are something that are uniquely human. Animal studies have shown that animals weep in a way, but they don't shed tears the way there's not an emotional connection. I have a friend that has a dog named Jackson, and this week Jackson went around a corner too fast and hit his eye, and he screamed. And did that naturally. It was a big one. I'll give that dog credit. He took quite a blow to the head in doing it, but he wasn't crying the way we would cry. Human beings are the only creatures that cry the way we do, with an emotional connection, either happiness or sadness. We're the only creatures that cry. When we talk about tears, we're talking about something, about what it is a core to be human. Something that's very personal and very, very much something that only we can do. And the first thing I would have you know about tears is that Christians are not immune from tears. Matthew 5:45, Jesus is speaking on the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, rain falls on the just and the unjust, or rain falls on the righteous and the wicked. When you become a Christian, you are not given a license that says your life will be free and clear the rest of this time and it's just easy. We have suffering in our lives. It's part of the deal. I don't like sales pitches for Christianity that make us assume that everything is okay when you become a Christian. Or there's no more death in your life. There's no more suffering, because a lot of the times we do suffer. And you could even make the argument that Jesus calls us to suffer. And as a Christian, this is something that we have to answer for to people who don't believe us. I don't know if you saw this, but Stephen Fry made international news this week. He is a British comic. He's a great actor. He's known, if you've ever seen The House, the TV show, Hugh Laurie is his comedic partner for years in Britain. But I know him as the shrink on the TV show Bones. He is the TV person on the movie V for Vendetta, and he's an international celebrity. I could not list all of his many film credits. Among his accolades, in the midst of being a great comic, and a celebrity of international proportions. He is also a devout atheist. Fry absolutely, positively affirms atheism in its highest form. This week he was filming a TV show called The Meaning of Life in Great Britain, where they're asking celebrities, intellectuals, and others about major questions of life. And everyone, it's very apparent that Fry is an atheist. So they asked him, what would you do? What would you say to God when you met God? And he gave them a long answer, and it blew the producer away because he had not been given a response this long. But his first words were this: bone cancer in children, what's up with that? And he ultimately concluded that if there was a heaven and God was right, he didn't want to be in that heaven because he thought the world was that unfair. Christians can get bone cancer, even if you're a little kid. In that sense, Fry is right. We shed as many tears as anybody else. But I don't necessarily think God causes those things. I think God gives us responses to those things that are healthy. I think God is the first person to shed a tear when someone's hurting, because I think that God loves us. I don't know why there's suffering in the world, and I don't know why we cry so much. But I know this. I know that God sent His own Son to die for me. So I know that God loves me. But I also know when God sent that Son, that Jesus is recorded as crying. When Lazarus dies, in Chelsea's favorite verse of the Bible, John 11:35, Jesus wept. The cruel of a tear was shed. But as Jesus surveys Jerusalem, as He's leaving this earth in His last times here, it hits Him. Not only what's going to happen to Him, but what it means for everybody in the history of Jerusalem, where they've killed so many prophets. And He weeps. And the word is not decruo, one tear down the cheek. He bawls. It upsets Him. I know for sure God loved Jesus. But God's love of Jesus did not spare Jesus some tears. So the first thing that I want to tell you is the sad reality is that this is true. Christians face suffering, and we're not immune from tears. And we need to know that when we go into the game. For me, what God gives me is a way to cope with those tears better than anything else on this earth. Secondly, I would have you know tears are valuable. They are incredibly valuable. People collect really weird things. I don't know. Does anybody have anything they want to share? We'll open it up there. Weirdest collection. Does anybody have any friend that collects something really weird? Anything? There's no right or wrong answers here, I assure you.
Okay, I'll give you one.
Okay.
My niece, it's really gross. She has every tooth she's ever lost. And there's like a little thing. That's
Yes, collecting all of your lost teeth, I cannot argue the assessment of yicky. Yes.
What about collecting all 3 of your children's lost teeth?
Now,
She has like drawers.
So my question is, are you going to try to recreate that, put them back together, or? I can see that. I think the rationale behind collecting the teeth of your children is to remember a good time in your life, to remember the growth, and it's you're having something attached to somebody you love very much. So on that level, I can't argue the yickiness, but there's some sweetness to collecting teeth. There is. I mean, it's a part of somebody you love. It also sounds like something a celebrity stalker would do. It sounds like something awesome, like souvenir. I know a guy who lives in Georgia, and I wrote this down because I couldn't lose. And I've been through his office. He's an accountant. And every room in his office, he has a really nice building. It's of things that he collects. He is a collector. He is a divorced man. He has quite a bit of disposable income and a lot of time on his hands. And one of the ways he fills it is by collecting these things. And there's a room of Victorian era levels and tape measures. Now that doesn't sound like much, but these things cost a fortune. Like if you were a builder, you would look at these like the holy grail of collecting of building supplies. They're historical, they could be in a museum, they're that good at pieces. This man cannot saw, he can't level, he can't build anything. Completely incapable. Frankly, he reminds me of myself. He's that little of a handyman. But for some reason, he got it in his head to collect Victorian era items to build things. But what that says about him, he probably thinks they're good conversation pieces, which they are. The first question of which is, why on earth are you collecting these things of which you could not possibly use in a million years? The answer, though, for him would be they have value. When you collect something, they have some value to you. As many of you know, anybody who's ever been to the parsonage knows that books are my biggest collection. You cannot go into a room of the parsonage without seeing one of the 25,000 books that are in there. I love books, which should tell you, if nothing else, when you go in there, you go, he values reading and intellect and education. It tells you what you value on some level about what you collect, what you fill your space with. And I don't know if you know this, but God actually collects something. And I'm going to read about that today. It's in Psalm 56. This is David talking or singing. It's a tribute to David. And it's he's been seized. He's a prisoner of war, essentially. Imagine your biggest rivals capturing you. I can't imagine how unpleasant this was. This is not a good time in his life. And so he writes this song while he's captured in Gath. I actually looked this up this week. It's called a Davidic miktam. We don't even know what miktam is, but we know it's important because it's in the Bible, so we keep that in there just in case. It's a miktam. Don't ask me what it is, but today you'll be reading and hearing from a miktam. Be gracious to me, God, for man tramples me. He fights and oppresses me all day long. My adversaries trample me all day, for many arrogantly fight against me. He's really redundant in these first two verses. He's saying, I'm getting clobbered by people that I don't like. Literally and spiritually and metaphorically. When I'm afraid, I will trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I will not fear. What can man do to me? He stops and says, I'm getting beaten up, but I'm not afraid. Because they can't do anything to me that you're not allowing. And I know if you're allowing this, you can still save me. I trust you. What can any human being do to me if God's on my side? It's a beautiful statement of faith. They twist my words all day long. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They stir up strife, they lurk. They watch my steps while they wait to take my life. Will they escape in spite of such sin? God bring down the nations in wrath. He's asking for vindication. And this is where it gets, to me, very, very, I love this imagery. He goes, you yourself have recorded my wanderings, put my tears in your bottle, are they not in your records? Then my enemies will retreat on the day when I call. This I know, God is for me. After mentioning how much he's suffering and how much he wants out of the situation, verse 8, you put my tears in your bottle. And the image is this, is that when David cries, God cares so much that he saves every one of those tears in a bottle. Because David's opinions, David's feelings, and David's heart matters to God. That is what God collects. God values us. Saves those tears. And I think that's a beautiful thing. The desert fathers of Christianity called it the gift of tears. A lot of times we look down on tears. I think particularly as in our culture as males, we look down on tears. Every psychological study that I read this week, none of them knew exactly why we cry, but all of them universally noted that women cry 4 times as much as men. We've outsourced the crying business to women, and I think that is a mistake. There's absolutely nothing wrong with crying. I think part of it is there's appropriate crying, which we get applauded for, and then there's crying for which we get maligned for. For instance, when someone you love passes, we respect those tears very much. But if I was playing sports right now and I skinned my knee and I started crying, you would probably think less of me. And in my mind, justifiably so, because I'm telling you, if I cry in sports right now, even if my leg got cut off somehow, I would crawl to a locker room where somebody could not see me, because that's how I've been trained. I just don't see those kind of tears from me. Some tears we respect and some we don't. And we think women, it's okay for them to cry a lot more than men. But I think those tears are a release. The great preacher Frederick Buechner summarized it in one sentence: tears are just mean you care. If you want tears, the meaning of them in one sentence, that's it. They just mean you care. So I think tears are a good thing. They serve as a release. They give voice to us in a time when we cannot express it any other way. The anthropologists, the cultural anthropologists think, well, of course God gave us these tears because if we were threatened and we were against a predator, we could cry and our body would have a way to show that we were in danger without alerting our predators by through the loud sound that we were in danger. But I don't think it's that. I think it's way more than that. I think there are sometimes we don't have human words for the suffering that we're going through. And tears are the only thing we have. Some pain is so deep that I can't verbalize it. And I think God gives us this outlet because we need to get it out of our system. I think it's a very healthy thing. I don't know why God allows suffering in every case. I'm sure it's different case to case. But I do know this, that tears are a gift of God. And they're not something we should be ashamed of. And as we've cried a lot together this past month, I think that's a healthy thing because it helps release, but it also says we care about what's going on with one another. And I think that's powerful. As much as I think tears are healthy, the thing that I want to leave you with tears comes from the last book of the Bible, Revelation chapter 21. This is talking about the new heaven and the new earth. This is the next to last chapter in the Bible. This is the end game of the Bible. If you've never read Revelation, it's a very interesting book, and it's trying. Billy Graham summarized it in this one sentence. He goes, "Don't worry, I've read the end of the book. We win." That's it in a nutshell. But there's a lot of details, a lot of metaphor, a lot of imagery in Revelation. And the entire premise is that John, traditionally John the disciple, scholarly, probably not. He's exiled on Patmos at the end of the first century, and he's writing. He sees visions, and God has him write them down. This is one of those last things. He not only sees things, but he hears things. He's sitting in the heavenly throne room at this wonderful climactic moment, new heaven, new earth. Everything is good at this moment, and this is what it says in verse 3 following. "Then I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will exist no longer. Grief, crying, and pain will exist no longer, because the previous things have passed away." Death, grief, crying will no longer exist. That is a beautiful image. I don't know a lot about heaven. I don't know how to describe heaven. I don't know how. I know it's peaceful. I know it's restful. There's not a lot of things, though, I can say in concrete terms about heaven. But if I knew nothing else about heaven, then death will no longer exist. Grief, crying, and pain will exist no longer. I don't want to go there. That's a city I don't want to live in. What I'm telling you is this, is that we will have tears. But those tears are valuable and a blessing. They're so valuable that God collects those tears. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, God wipes away our tears. I don't know if you've ever had anybody wipe away your tears. I don't remember much of that happening. I don't cry that much, but when I was a child and I would cry, I can still remember my mother wiping away my tears because she cared about me and she wanted me to see clearly and she wanted me to calm down. And it was one of the most loving acts I think I have witnessed. I like the image of God caring so much about me that when I cry, God storing my tears, meaning they matter. Matters to God when I cry. But I think I like even more the fact that they don't matter. God's just not collecting them. God is wiping them away and healing me so that I will feel better. There is suffering in the world, but for me, the key question is not as much even why there is suffering, but where is God when it's happening? And I think the answer to where is God when we cry is that God is collecting those tears and wiping them away. But I also think God is the first person to cry with us, because I don't think God wants us suffering any more than we do. The question then is, what do we do with this? I think if our job as Christians is to be Christ's representatives in this world, we need to do our best to fulfill the God role here on this earth. We need to be Christ's and God's hands and feet. Which means when we see somebody suffering and crying, we need to value those tears. And I think it'd be really weird if you just started showing up in hospitals with little bottles and say, "Hey, I'm collecting today." No, I'm not suggesting you do that. But I am suggesting that when you see somebody crying, make it matter to you. Pause. My favorite thing about John 11:35 is the pause in the text. Whoever numbered those verses, it's 2 words in Greek, or 3 words in Greek. The oiesus, they say the Jesus wept. It gives them the proper noun. It's a way to emphasize the Jesus there. And the people that were doing the verses in John, they stop and they make it its own verse. They stop and think about what it means for Jesus to weep. When you see somebody crying, pause. Give pause. And acknowledge that whatever is going on in their life matters to them at that moment. And if it matters to them, it matters to God. And it might all matter to us. And if God's ultimate objective is to take those tears away, as much as we acknowledge those tears, and there are some tears we cannot just take away. God is the one that only God can do that, but I think we can comfort in that moment. And remind that even though they are crying, God loves them. You don't have to say that. In fact, that might turn somebody off. But I think if you love somebody while they're crying, I think it says something about the way the universe works and the way that God can still love you even when you're crying. And I think that's powerful. Again, I'm preaching this sermon. We're in the Sermon by Request series. And this is not something somebody requested, but I think it's something we've needed because we've experienced so much death and loss recently. Know it's okay to cry because it means it matters to you. And know that it matters not only to you, it matters to God, so much so that God is up there, down here, everywhere, keeping track of those tears. And because it matters to God, and because it matters to the person, it should matter to us. So do something this week to show that someone else matters.